Karen is a former high school science teacher and federal agency spokesperson. Was one of the first female U.S. Coast Guard licensed captains in New England in 1980. Studying oceanography and marine biology in grad school, she taught aboard boats that she ran, ranging from an engineless 66-foot Chesapeake Bay bug-eye schooner to a 99-foot Rhodes Ketch, to her own 55-foot Staysail schooner, from New England to the Caribbean. In 2001, she sailed her Dana 24 from Puget Sound to Prince William Sound, and between 2002 and 2005, she was part of a seabird research team in the Aleutians aboard a 137-foot research ship up in the North Pacific. From 2011 to 2013, she and her husband Jim sailed, I forgot to ask you how to say it, but you'll say it up here,
Sockdolager.
Their Dana 24 from Port Townsend to New Zealand via Mexico and Polynesia. Thank you for being here tonight, Karen.
Yay for the AV guy.
Well, I didn't come up with a name for my story, but if I did, it would be How on Earth Do You Follow and Act Like Him? I'm also glad we don't have to do this by Zoom anymore, so I hope you like my pajamas. In 1980, I left my job teaching high school science in Connecticut, and I became one of the first female captains in New England. The Coast Guard guys who administered the test told me that they had never heard of a woman taking the exam before. So the only other woman captain I knew of was Kate on the Clearwater down on the Hudson. But if you try to tell a New Englander that New York is part of New England, they will run you through with a fried clam. The language on my license read, "This is to certify that Karen Sullivan has given satisfactory evidence to the undersigned that he can be safely entrusted, etc." Anyway, my first job interview was conducted in a rundown fish shack on New Haven Harbor in a rough part of town. The boat was the J.N. Carter, a 66-foot engineless Chesapeake Bay bug-eye schooner, and even though it was technically a ketch, they called it a schooner because it was complicated. The name of the education and research outfit that owned it was called Schooner Incorporated, which has a better ring to it than Ketch Inc. So the job would be to take out 25 passengers per day and to teach oceanography, marine biology, sailing, and navigation. We would do this by towing plankton nets and setting and retrieving an otter trawl under sail. So an otter trawl, it was big. It was a 28-foot weighted net with a huge mouth on it and great big otter boards, 70-pound otter boards that went out on each side, and we set it under sail. So that was the job. We'd sort the catch into bins. We'd haul it up and sort them and identify things and and throw them back, except for the occasional flounder with required dissection with drawn butter. J.M. Carter's big, wide open necks, we ate well. They were their perfect classroom. So I walk into the interview, and there are a dozen board members there, and they're silhouetted in front of the picture window, and their arms are crossed. So they made up this craggy massif of men that reminded me of the White Cliffs of Dover. The only other place to stand was in front of the open bathroom door, and the view over my shoulder was the toilet. So one of the men stepped forward, and he began lecturing the whole room about how women weren't competent to run ships. And I'm not making this up. And then he turned to me as if I had offended him, and he shouted at me, and he said, "You are a woman." He said the word like you'd say colonoscopy. He kept going. "Women are not competent," he said, "and I, for one, am not voting for you." So I'm not making that up, and I'm not making this up either, because right after that, the office guard dog, which was a friendly Doberman, a goofy Doberman, walked behind me into the bathroom and started drinking out of the toilet. So, I am sure you can imagine a dog with a tongue the size of a shovel schlumping water in an echo chamber. I stood my ground. If a hysterical hippopotamus had charged out of there, I would not have moved. So, Mr. Pestilence stepped back, and a kindly older man stepped forward. So he said, "Being a woman as you are, how are you going to get people to follow orders?" And I went, "Pretty much the same as a man would." And I wanted to say, "Didn't you mind your mother?" So Mr. Admiral Pestilence didn't like that. So he stepped forward again. And he said, now he's bellowing, and he said, "How are you going to be able to horse that boat?" And now he's pointing at it like the Grim Reaper, and it is looking awfully big and scary. "How are you going to horse that boat around the corner in a blow?" And I said, "Well, if I get that boat into a situation where she needs to be horsed around a corner, it'll be my fault because I didn't use my head, which is the most important piece of sailing equipment there is." So the board outvoted Mr. Admiral, Your Majesty Pestilence, and they hired me, but he was not a happy camper. So in unrelated news, about 10 fishermen with whom I shared the dock, it was actually a big rickety pier, they were completely ignoring me. They wouldn't talk to me. And I don't think it was out of unkindness. I just think they didn't know what to make of a woman captain. And out in the harbor pilots were making woman driver jokes on the VHF. And honestly, in 1981, in New Haven Harbor, nothing, it seemed, got the bats going in men's belfries like a woman captain. So fast forward a few days to a blustery mid-March afternoon, and I'm working on deck. I became aware of a big man in railroad cap and overalls, and he was staring at me. He said, "I heard there was a woman captain." And I'm mopping the deck, and I said, "Yep." And he said, "You got her looking like a yacht." Thanks. And he said, "She ain't a yacht, you know." And I said, "There's nothing wrong with taking a little pride in her appearance." And the next thing I know, he's jumped aboard, and he slid down the ladder real fast, jumped aboard, and I'm looking over the stern thinking, okay, I could swim to shore if I have to, because it's a rough neighborhood. But he introduced himself as the former owner of this 66-foot Chesapeake Bay bug-eye schooner, and he had driven all the way up from St. Michael's to tell me about this boat. So, since I've been given only an hour of instruction in a flat calm on how this boat sailed, and she sailed differently, I was very glad to see him. So he asked me, he said, "Did you ever notice how the mainmast kind of curves to starboard?" And I said, "Yeah, I did notice that. I figured it was, the rigging got set up wrong a long time ago." And he said, "Nope, she got that way when I capsized her." And I went, "Oh God." So I asked him to tell me everything he knew about this boat, and he did. He walked up to the foremast where there were two sets of pin rails, one down low, one a little higher, for belaying lines to. And he said, you see this? He points at the lower pin rail. He goes, if this pin rail goes in the water, you got to get sail off her right away. And then he points to the upper pin rail. And he said, if this one goes in the water, she's taking you over and there ain't nothing you can do to stop her. And I'm like, I get goosebumps even every time I think about this. So what would you do? I mean, would you quit your first captain's job before you even sailed? So I thought about it, and then I marched up to the office, and I told the executive director about the capsize, which he already knew about but hadn't told me. I was furious. So I told him, you better run interference with these people who want to pressure me to go out in weather that I shouldn't. So in those days, Schooner Incorporated was a shoestring operation, and cancellations meant losses. So he promised he would, and he did. So fast forward to early April. I had 25 inner-city kids aboard, plus a first mate, a young deckhand, and an older guy that the board, Mr. Pestilence, had foisted on me as crew. This older guy, who said he was an experienced sailor, was on the main sheet. The day was fine. There was nothing bad in the forecast. And we were about 2 miles out, still inside the outer breakwater. New Haven's a big harbor. I noticed some clouds forming over the Sleeping Giant, which is a mountain about 8 miles north of New Haven. And to be on the safe side, we started sailing back toward the inner harbor. The clouds built fast, and although nothing was in the forecast, I had everyone in life jackets, of course, and I told the kids to sit on the main hatches in the center of the deck and to stay there. I told them we might get a little bit of wind soon, and we might be pretty busy handling the boat. We might not have time to tell them what we were doing. And I also gave them the sailor's rule, which is one hand for the ship and one hand for yourself. So as the wind picked up, I had the crew lower the foresail, which was on the boom that would have been swinging over their heads, so that was secured. So with this squall line coming, it was time to tack. Remember, we had no engine in this 66-foot bug-eye schooner. The only engine we had was a 55 horsepower outboard on a dory that you had to strap to the side of the hull. We operated under the same Coast Guard exemption that allowed the big engineless schooners up in Maine, the Maine coasting schooners, to take passengers. They didn't have and don't have internal engines either. I gave the order to tack and had the mate back the jib to make sure her head swung all the way through the eye of the wind. I told the older guy to ease on the main sheet, to ease the main, but he didn't. So the boat stopped in mid-tack and we got into irons and we started drifting backwards. I swung the helm all the way over and told this guy to ease the main, but he didn't again. And the boat picked up speed going backwards, heading toward the middle breakwater. I never saw a boat sail backwards as good as that boat. We were probably doing 2 or 3 knots now, and I leaped off the helm and I yelled at him to ease it. He did, a little, and we stopped going backwards. But now there was a different problem. We were stopped dead in the water, and there was a blue wall of wind coming at us, gale force, whipping up the water, and we were broadside to it with no way on. It was going to catch us all standing with no forward momentum to help dissipate that wind energy. So more of it would be translated into healing. So I told the mate to let the jib fly, and he did. The mainsail still needed to go out a lot more, but the older guy was now staring at the squall as if hypnotized. So I jumped over there and I slapped the sheet out of his hand. I really do enjoy saying I slapped the sheet out of his hand. The wind and the coil of rope that was the main sheet went flying through its blocks. I yelled, "Stay clear." Actually, I yelled, "Stay clear!" And the mainsail still caught enough wind to heel the carter way, way over. I yelled to the kids to get to the high side, but they didn't need me to say that. The sails were flogging like mad, and the mate was up by the foresail shrouds where this owner had been, and he points at his feet, and they're underwater. So then he points at the lower pin rail, and that's about to go underwater, and we are starting to go over. And then the wind is just screaming at this point, and I see the kids watching my face to see if I would panic. So this has happened to me a few times, and I knew I had to keep my expression calm. So the water was now starting to creep toward the upper pin rail. The wind had us absolutely pinned. I thought, I better do a mayday call in case we do capsize and the masthead antenna goes in the water. So I thought about how we get the kids on the far side of the boat away from the breakwater. How they were all in life jackets. We could get them to keep the boat between them and the rocks. But just as I moved to go and grab the radio mic, which is down in a little shallow deck cabin, I could feel her pause. The wind paused very briefly, and then she just went crash, splashed down on her lines back in the water. So we got underway as if, oh, that has happened. So we got underway, and when we got back to the dock, I said to the older guy, "We won't be needing you anymore as crew." And I told the kids, "You're going to have a good story for your grandchildren." So I'll finish with this. About a week later, the weather was perfect. It was a light southwest breeze, a boat full of bird watchers, and the fishermen were still ignoring me. So I said to the mate and the deckhand, "Let's back her into the dock under sail." We told the bird watchers what we were doing and why, and how well this boat sailed backwards. And they loved it. So they were all cool, sitting there in the center hatch. So instead of normally turning into the pier, we sailed right past it. And there are shoals up there, so that this really got the fishermen's attention. They were like, first of all, we're coming in under sail. Second of all, we just missed the dock completely, so now they're really wild. I pull up, I get her into irons, she starts to back up perfectly. I said to the deckhand, who was this 14-year-old kid whose dad was a tanker captain, wonderful kid, and I said, and to him and the mate, make this look like we do this all the time. So I'll just give you hand signals. So everybody was listening, and the fishermen. Well, anyway. So the deckhand goes up to the foredeck, and he's backing the jib. I give him a little hand signal, and he backs the jib, and then he goes. The mate is back in the main, and so we basically did this, and we zigzagged that boat, and we did a perfect eggshell landing on the dock. The fishermen they fell all over themselves to help us, and they were amazing. Oh, and I had asked the mate while we were backing in. I couldn't look at the fishermen, so I said to the mate, "Are they watching?" He went, "Oh yes." So we back it in, we do the eggshell landing, and the fishermen were just like, helping the passengers off, everything. And so they afterward, I deliberately sort of cleaned up the boat a little bit, made them wait, and they were up on the dock. As soon as I came up on the dock, they surrounded me, and their leader, he looks at me, and I'm completely surrounded by these great big men, and he goes, "That was the slickest piece of sailing we've ever seen. You're one of us."